Welcome to another edition of the 21st Century Reformation Hour. I am Herman Otten, the pastor of Trinity Church in New Haven, and also the editor of Christian News. As I do each week, as soon as I complete the following issue of the paper, this one is dated October 4, I give you a summary of what the paper is all about. Our lead story this week is Edwin Hinnefeld, man of integrity, who called for integrity. He recently died, and here he is receiving his award, Confessional Lutheran of the Year award. But most people don't know he was also a general military hero. He went to D-Day and he was wounded, and we have that all stored in here. What I have this week, I have a number of testimonials of different men commenting on him who knew him well, about a dozen or so, some rather prominent men, and both pastors and laymen in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. I went through my files on Mr. Hinnefeld. You can see they're rather large, all the letters he sent, articles through the years. And what I did, I summarized them, and that's the bulk of our issue this week. What he did, he called for integrity and honesty in our church, particularly with regard to finances. He saw how the membership was declining, mission giving was declining, and the bureaucracy was growing. He exposed how they were wasting money on various things that they didn't have to spend money on. He is a very gifted man, millionaire many times over, but he made his living in that sort of thing, examining the records of financial companies. Right, then we have here, of course, theological integrity, practical know-how. That's one of the testimonials. This was given by Dr. Lawrence White. Here I have a picture of the Pope, and we have with him the Anglican Archbishop Rowan Williams. The first time the Pope had ever been leading in Westminster Abbey there. They're getting rather closer together. Over here, armed guards remove LCMS district president from voters meeting. That again is that case that's going on in California. They had to have armed guards to take the district president out. But remember that what's devastating about this is that the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is now arguing to get the church property that it is a hierarchical church and not a congregational church. That's totally contrary to what the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has always said and what its constitution says. Over here, politics is important, but it won't save the nation. Again, we have a photo of the Tea Party here. Politics will not save the nation. Here I have a picture of Clark Pinnock, which he recently died, a prominent theologian. Now, some might wonder why have so much on a non-Lutheran theologian. Clark Pinnock and I were good friends. He sold hundreds, well, distributed anyway, hundreds of copies of my book, Baylor God, published in 1965. And I did with his book, Set Forth Your Case. Wonderful books. Unfortunately, he changed. The reason I put that in there is because I detect the same change happening now in our Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. I mentioned here a symposium that they had at the seminary just a few days ago, this week in fact, where they came out with some of the same theology that I fought 50 years ago. They came up with Isaiah 7. It didn't refer, according to the major speaker, and who was not refuted, it did not refer to the virgin birth of Mary. I can guarantee you, the only word in the Bible that Isaiah could have used to clinch that it was only a virgin was Alma, and that, of course, today they reject that. Now they make it like it's referring to some person living at that time. I have here, of course, my review of Pinnock's book, but then again here, LCMS still managing the news. That's why we started Christian News 49 years ago, because they were managing the news. We had to have the news told, give all the facts. Over here, going full circle, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod following pattern of Clark Pinnock. It's all documented. Here, Edwin Hinnefeld called to his eternal home, who will be the watchdog? About 60 years ago, Dr. Wilhelm Esch came from Germany and told our officials, you need a watchdog. You need somebody to read what's going on in the theological world. Most of you church officials, he didn't call them bureaucrats, but that's what they were. You don't know what's going on. You need somebody to do that. Well, they didn't do it. Some would say, well, when Christian News started, they had the watchdog. But Ed Hinnefeld was the watchdog as far as finances go. Prior to him, there was a Fred Rutz. We promoted his book, A Businessman Looks at His Church. Well, there are a host of others here. There's the Hinnefeld and Christian News, what different people said about him. Perhaps I could read off to you. Oh, what's interesting, Hinnefeld always, once a year I go down and have an Ironman triathlon down in Florida, Claremont, Florida. And Hindenfeld would always be our host. And then you can see here, I'm talking about here, our visit there to Ironman, Florida. And he finally says, you know, Pastor Otten, you're time to act your age. Quit that stuff. Well, finally it did happen. But here I have Ralph Preuss commenting on Hindenfeld. We have here David Anderson. He was on one of the boards there. A Gentle Rich Man Carried to Heaven by Dr. Fred Bowie and some others. But now, this is interesting. Harper wanted to release one of the most anticipated Bibles of our time, the C.S. Lewis Bible. Many claim he was such a great Orthodox Christian theologian. He was not. He denied justification by faith alone, the vicarious satisfaction of Christ. He accepted purgatory. And I point that out. We have that in our Christian News Encyclopedia. Many people simply don't want to recognize that. But I have the facts, what he really did. Now, we've been saying that for 50 years. He was still living at the time when he rejected justification. Here's an interesting article. Father Richard John Newhouse, Faulty Judgment or Willful Ignorance. Here, a Roman Catholic publication takes issue with Father Richard Newhouse for defending a Roman Catholic or actually bisexual bishop. He defended him. He says nothing wrong with him. I quote in this book, and I have a picture of it here. It's called The Rite of Sodomy. It's about 1,300 pages. And in this book, the author, a Roman Catholic, never has been refuted, shows that even Pope Paul VI was a homosexual. Nobody has refuted it. The last page is quite interesting. It's titled, The Message Which Leads to the Promised Land. Well, we had a balloon race in our town here, and then a float. Each church puts in a float, and the theme of the parade was Living a Fairy Tale in New Haven. So what we did, we had the Nativity, Jesus died and rose for you, no fairy tale. Then we have 3 crosses you can see here. Jesus, well, first he was born for you, he died and rose, and finally we have here, and I have it blown up here, the empty tomb. Jesus died and rose for you, no fairy tale. And after the parade, then they had the balloon race, and they came here right over our camp. It was fantastic. You can see the pictures here. And one of the balloonists who landed up here, very famous. I got her, she gave me her card. I got the thing here. Here's what it says. Highlights of Dr. Yan's ballooning career include placing second in the 9th Ladies World Cup held in Châteauroux, France, where her favorite memory is of landing at a castle. This time she landed at next to Camp Trinity, flying over the Pyramid of the Moon, north of Mexico City, and flying in the first balloon race in Inner Mongolia, China. And then she's other memorable fights. But when I said, you know, all of these other floats they had there, even these balloons, and all of the banks balloons and the politicians and so on, none of them lead to the promised land. Well, I was sitting there next to the thing, you can see it here. He says, what are you? Are you Moses? Are you going to bring us to the promised land? I thought, now wait a minute. I looked at them, they're not going to do it. No, I don't do it. But our message does. Jesus Christ, he leads to the promised land. Well, folks, remember, Christ is the only way, and he leads to the promised land. My prayer is that always remember that when we get involved in all these things, always Jesus, he leads to the promised land. See you next week.